My name is William Herman. I'm a graduate student at Columbia University in the Earth Institute's Master of Science program in Sustainability Management. My professional background is in finance and capital planning for higher education. Over the past 10 years, I've had the distinct pleasure of managing SUNY Maritime College's capital program. I'm also a SUNY Sustainability Coordinator, and I'm the New York City representative for the New York Coalition of Sustainability in Higher Education. I'm joined today by my esteemed colleague, Dr. Barbara Workentine, who joined the SUNY Maritime faculty 28 years ago, obtained the rank of full professor in 1998, and was promoted to the rank of distinguished service professor in 2010. Dr. Workentine teaches all of the biology courses offered within the Marine Environmental Science program, which she was instrumental in developing for the college. She maintains an active research program, as evident from the publication of over 35 peer-reviewed papers. Her research interests are aquatic ecology, with special reference to fish population dynamics and benthic macroinvertebrates from both marine and freshwater environments. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today regarding the paper you co-authored, entitled An Evaluation of the Ichthyofauna of the Bronx River, a Resilient Urban Waterway. In this study, you conducted a comprehensive inventory of fish species and subsequently compared your findings with historical data for the same region. Typically, our study of urban ecology discovers negative environmental externalities of urbanization, including a decline of native species within an ecosystem. I was particularly interested by your findings, which revealed an unusually limited decline in biodiversity over time as the area became more developed, whereas urbanization is generally well known to damage aquatic systems and impact regional biota, including the diversity of faunal composition. Dr. Workentine, could you briefly detail the intent of your study in the Bronx River and what you expected to find going into it?
Bill, before I start answering your question, let me just start off by saying thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak with you and to talk about this work. We didn't start off with this as our initial project. We had a small grant from the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, it's called NOAA, to put together an illustrated guide that could be used by high school teachers, students who are interested in doing some work in estuarine type studies or aquatic work. And so we decided to survey the river and gather some information about the composition of the fish fauna in the Bronx River so that we could put this guide together. As a result of doing that, we talked to a lot of people that were just on the river. Some of the local community groups were collecting or just playing in the river, running their boats and sailing. And they would always say to us, this river is a dead river, a dead zone. And we would look at them puzzled and we'd say to them, no, it's not a dead zone. You'd be surprised what's in there. And they said, no, nothing could live in here. It's so overly polluted. Look at all of this industrial development. How could anything live here?
Sure.
So we decided to show them that there was more to just bad, publicity to the system, that there was really something alive and living there. So we went on a survey, and we found, to their amazement and even to ours, a very, very rich abundance of fauna in that river. So this study basically fell out of a curiosity more than a targeted study in doing this. And then it led to more work that we continued to do over the many years.
Could you describe the sampling methodology that you used and the process your team employed to carry out the difficult task of fish species identification in the Bronx River?
We use a number of different types of gear because different parts of the river warrant different types of sampling gear. So starting in the estuary, which is from the East River going up to Lafayette Avenue in the Bronx, we used a small vessel that we chartered from SUNY Maritime College, where I teach, and we used that for trawling. So there's a channel, it's a deep channel, it's used by commercial entities coming in to bring in their materials to the industrial areas of the river. And we would trawl through that channel and bring up whatever we would get. Now, we would get surprising things. We would get fish, and we would also get a lot of debris because it is, an industrial site. And so we would bring up tires, and we would bring up traffic cones and all kinds of mud and everything else and pieces of metal. But in that mess, we would also bring up a lot of different fish. That was one sampling gear. The other type of sampling gear that we would do is beach seining. So we would just pull a net through the water, 2 people, 3 people pulling a net and just bringing up the organisms that way. We would do, in the freshwater area, we would do small nets. We would call them push nets. And 2 people would stand on a net, and 1 person would jump literally into the water and scurry up the fish and scare them into the net, and we would get them that way. We would also set out something called a fight net, which is a multi-chambered net. And the fish we would leave it there for a tidal cycle, or we would leave it in the fresh water and allow the water to just rush through these little nets and collect whatever fish would get gathered up in the cod end of that net. So there was a lot of different things. As far as identifying the organisms, for the marine stuff, I'm very familiar with the organisms in that area. One of my colleagues on the paper, Joe Racklin, is also very familiar with the marine organisms. So we didn't have much difficulty identifying them. Periodically, we'd have a fish that we didn't realize what it was, and we'd have to go to the resources. And there's a lot of literature out there that'll help us. The other thing that we did was when we went into the freshwater, where our expertise was not quite as good, we had another colleague by the name of Antonio Papantonios, who was very much involved in sampling freshwater fish. So he was a part of our team, and he would help us with the identifying of the freshwater fish. We would also use various resources for that. There's a number of keys that are out there for dealing with the freshwater fishes. There's a couple of books by Smitty and Smitty to deal with both estuarine and freshwater fish. So there's a lot of resources available to help us. So in addition to our own expertise, years of experience, using the books, we were able to get to the bottom of all the organisms that we found.
How do you explain the resilience of the ichthyofauna in the Bronx River?
Well, since the Clean Water Act in 1970 was passed, one of the things that we've noticed over time is that the rivers have been improving. I'll tell you a funny little story. A long time ago, probably in the 1980s, we would go to Orchard Beach in the Bronx, and one of the professors that I was taking a class with used to tell his students that if you found a starfish, you would automatically get an A. After a while, he couldn't do that anymore because you would find starfish, which means the water was cleaning up. So the resilience, the fish in the estuarine, they're migratory for the most part. They move in and out. They are dealing with a lot of tidal change. They are dealing with salinity gradients being very different in an estuary. So they are going to be a tolerant type of fish. Those that are sensitive, something that needs a lot of oxygen, has a high oxygen event, silverside's one of them. And they will position themselves where the water is within their range of comfort. The Lauridian ice sheet receded about 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. That basically separated your marine fish from your freshwater fish. Your freshwater fish are now stuck up there for 12,000 years. So they've been living in those waters a long time. So after that glacier receded, they got stuck. So they either adapted or died. Well, they've adapted because we proved that there are a whole bunch of fish up there that are doing quite well.
Wow. Is that unique to this region, or is fish resiliency a paradigm for urban ecology?
There are tolerant fish, and there are fish that are sensitive to poor water quality in all systems. I would say that what we found is not unique to our region. Yes, there's areas that are highly polluted, such as, the Gowanus Canal, to name one, which needs critical attention. But people have been paying more attention to the urban streams, and they're finding similar results to what we find in the Bronx River.
What are some marine and estuary ecosystem services, and how would you assign value to these in the context of capital planning within an urban environment?
First of all, you need to protect the estuaries. I think we've seen that with the impact that Superstorm Sandy has had on our coastal water systems. Estuaries have a number of values. One of the ones coming from my point of view as a fisheries biologist is that these estuaries serve as nursery grounds for about 70% of all your commercially important fish. If we lose an estuary, we lose that stock, and that's critical to the economy and for our well-being. So from the point of view of urban development, removing estuaries, taking out deltas have had detrimental impact on the coastal zone. We've seen that with the impact that Superstorm Sandy had. The deltas serve as a buffer. They help prevent the surge from coming inland more than it should. Estuaries, by having spartina beds, by having those salt marshes in place, they're going to help mitigate the impact of those coastal surges that come from these major storms. So those are really, from my point of view, two very critical things that people have to take into consideration if they are going to be doing any kind of development, capital planning for those systems.
What do you think about enhancing urban biodiversity?
I'm all for enhancing biodiversity. Can't be a biologist and not want biodiversity. So I would say that one of the things that you have to watch out for is how you do it and what you're doing. An impact statement or an impact assessment has to be done. And by case in point, I can tell you that we actually went through this process of trying to enhance the biodiversity of the Bronx River by introducing alewife into the river. We believed that alewife were at one point migratory to the Bronx River, but in the 1600s, when all the dams were put in place to that river, that those dams impeded the freshwater movement of these fish into the river, and therefore they were extirpated from that site.
So are you familiar with any case studies of successful urban sustainability projects?
There's a lot of groups working in urban sites, and I will name a couple of them. Like the Bronx River Alliance is working in the Bronx River. The Rocking the Boat, which deals with high school kids, and they teach them how to build boats, but in the meantime they give them knowledge of the stewardship of the rivers and the respect for those rivers. Sustainable South Bronx is another group, and there's a number of these NGOs out there that are working on trying to promote stewardship of the Bronx River. So they have been doing a number of things. They've been building spartina beds along the river, so trying to enhance the marsh regions. They have been doing, seeding of oyster beds. They've even converted an old concrete plant into a park. So they're acquiring land, and they're trying to make greenways all along the rivers. And they're actually, the people are trying to do this all along the whole coastline of the Bronx, as a matter of fact. So there are a number of really good projects. And the importance is that you got to get the local community to be engaged in what you're doing, and you got to give them the wherewithal to become stewards of that river, to have a respect for the river.
Right.
And that helps.
And that begins with the youth.
That begins with the youth. You have to bring it up from that point up, because that's where they'll become. And what they do is they train them, they teach them, and then they teach the next generation, and it passes on family.
That's
so
wonderful.
It's really good. There's a lot of that good stuff going on.
Recently, corporate and government policies have acknowledged sustainability as a critical and necessary element of operations and for future development. This provides hope for intergenerational equity, the preservation of ecosystems, and the invaluable services they provide. Do you think that change is happening quickly enough, or should we be doing more to protect our collective future?
Well, I don't know if it's happening quickly enough or not. However, I'm happy to see that change in thinking about ecosystem sustainability is getting more attention than it had in the past. I think that the impact that the events of such storms as Superstorm Sandy and Irene, the hurricanes, have had a lot of impact on our coastal ecosystems. And the human impact is also in there. So I think they're beginning to rethink how they are protecting the coastlines. And like I said earlier, I think they're looking at, trying to understand how we can use nature to actually mitigate some of these consequences of storms like these, rather than just build bulkheads.
Dr. Warkentine, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to review the amazing work that you've done to research the impacts of human activity on urban ecology. I'm grateful for you and your continued commitment to marine environmental sciences. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bill, and I appreciated the time to talk to you about my work.